Have you been playing my records?
Yes.
So didn't I tell you the procedure?
Yeah, you told me all about it, Shrevey. They have to be in alphabetical order.
And what else?
They have to be filed alphabetically and according to year as well.
And what else?
So embarrassing.
What else?
I don't know.
You don't know. Well, let me give you a hint, okay? I found my James Brown record filed under the J's instead of the B's. I don't know who taught you to alphabetize, but to top it off, he's in the rock and roll section instead of the R&B section. How can you do that?
It's too complicated, Shrevey. See, every time I pull out a record, there's this whole procedure I have to go through. I just want to hear the music. That's all.
Too complicated to just keep my record.
Okay, we'll interrupt Daniel Stern there. Why were you so taken aback by my choice of clip to start off today's episode?
When I first saw this movie, which was actually not that long ago, maybe like 5 years ago, I actually watched it for the first time. That scene stood out to me like, oh, like that sounds like a fight that if I got married when I was like 22, that's the type of fight that I might have with my wife. And it was embarrassing. The whole thing was absolutely embarrassing.
Oh yeah. It hit a little too close to home for sure.
Yeah, very close to home.
I'm noticing some prominent silence from our guest.
Special guest
Molly is back on the pod. Thank you, Molly, for joining us.
I'm happy to be here.
That's such a lie.
I haven't been here in a while. I got blackballed for a couple seasons, so happy to be back.
You were on for Body Heat. Do you remember?
That was a while ago. Yeah,
that was the last one. Yeah.
Was that the last one?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been a while.
Oh
It
my
was
God.
blackballed for multiple seasons. Blackball.
3 seasons ago, maybe 2 seasons ago.
Rough. I'm sorry. It's Film Trace.
Oh yes, we trace the life of a film from conception to production, all the way to release and reception. We're doing movies set in the 1950s, and we're doing the 80s. The 80s decade, their interpretation of the 1950s. So 2 films that were released in the 1980s that were set in the 50s. The first one, these were both my choices, weren't they? I think, Chris? Maybe?
I don't know.
I'm losing you guys.
Oh, you guys still there? Molly, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here. I can hear you fine.
Weird.
Something's up with your audio, Chris. Because I can hear.
Chris, you still there?
He's gonna have to come out. Try coming out and come back in, Chris.
Yeah. I can cut that.
Okay. I'm good now.
Post. Do it in post. I'm gonna do a clap. Can you hear me now, Chris? Are you good?
Yeah. You were all good now. Sorry about that, guys.
There we go. It's easy enough. Were these my choices, Chris? I think they were.
Yes, they were.
And I specifically chose Desert Hearts to have Molly back on the show because she so graciously told me to watch it. How long ago was that? Maybe 3 or 4 years ago? Because it was on Criterion. And she was right. It's amazing. And so I wanted to have 2 reasons. One, I think it's a really interesting movie to talk about the 1950s and films set in the 1950s and how that interpretation can be so different depending on which decade or which director chooses to depict it. But Chris, you've never seen it before, right?
No, I hadn't even heard of it.
At all? Never heard of it?
No. And then, of course, like when I do research for the episode, I'm like, how have I not come across this movie?
Female director.
Yeah, that's right.
But like,
Molly, how did you find this movie? Did you just sort of, was it when you were younger or recently?
Yeah, I saw it a long time ago. I don't remember when I first saw it. But yeah, then whenever they put it on Criterion, I noticed I rewatched it, and then I told you to watch it. Yeah, those of us who know. I don't know why you didn't know. I mean, I think you have to reflect on that, why you didn't know that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, I think especially because when I teach, I do a little unit on romance films, and I like specifically made sure to have films representing multiple perspectives, including queer films. And I don't know, like it just feels like there is some kind of missing access point unless you just came across it on the Criterion channel. Is that what you're saying?
No, I mean, like I watched it like 20 years ago, probably for the first time. I was saying I saw it again on Criterion, and that's when I told my friends to watch it. Yeah.
How did you come across it originally, though?
20 years, who knows? Yeah.
I mean, I don't know originally, but I'm saying like I think it's my interest in probably seeing films and finding films by female directors or queer films or stuff like that probably predated your individual interests in that, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. Chris, first time seeing it, what'd you think? Did you like it?
Yeah, I was floored. I was very much just like, where has this movie been? And I know that it seems so simple, but it really is. I think kind of like what you were saying, Molly, is like, not only was it a female director that largely didn't do much afterwards, she worked a lot in television, but also just like this cast was stellar, but like the most famous person in it is Jeffrey Tambor for like 3 scenes.
Yeah.
So it seems like it is kind of I mean, obviously, like I'm constantly watching things from Criterion and trying to gain all kinds of like understanding and knowledge of film. I'm just so happy that it's another blind spot that I didn't even know I had that is taken care of. So I'll thank you, Dan, for choosing it, and give no credit to Molly.
This episode's gonna be spicy. Okay, keep going.
Well, I mean, also to the point that like it was not it did okay at the box office. It was not received very well when it was released. And then the box office was okay. Budget was 1.5 million. We'll talk about how she actually raised that money, which is a totally crazy story. And then box office was 2.5, so not like the worst thing in the world, but it wasn't like a massive, huge hit or something like that. So that's probably another reason why, it wasn't maybe the easiest film to remember. It didn't make a huge splash culturally. But yeah, I mean, I think it's like
I think another
film technically, like it's
right,
like completely at the end of the day, like there was no major studio that helped on the production. It was essentially just Donna and like everybody else. Basically, she raised money to fund the film, like a really old school way of doing it. But it took like I think 6 years to raise enough money to do it, and it was all
including like a big check from Gloria Steinem and various other women's groups.
Yeah,
because it was seen very much as like a political statement as much as it was also just like a narrative adaptation, just like really solid romance story. I think it's incredible that you have this kind of movie that like can really hit hard on a first viewing, even 30 some years later, and yet even though it's controversial subject matter for the time period, it plays as a very kind of traditional Hollywood romance.
That was the intention,
regardless of the queer aspect. Yeah.
Like I don't think that there was. I think I forget where I'm trying to find this source, but there was no intention to make this as like a polemic film or anything like that, like a hyper political film. It was supposed to be like basically a romance genre piece. Just that the characters were, not your typical characters in the lead roles. And the romance wasn't the typical romance, but it's kind of like it hits a lot of the sort of traditional romantic film tropes. That's not really a knock against it per se. It just wasn't like supposed to be this radical film. Right. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's one of the reasons it didn't land as big as it maybe could have. I don't know, Molly, what do you think? When you watched this for the first time or recently, did it feel like there was like a political agenda, or did it feel like a polemic, or did it feel kind of like a more traditional romance to you?
I mean, it's a romance, but I think it's, what I would argue is, I think it actually is political, like telling, which I feel like you guys intuitively understand, like telling certain stories inherently is political, just like talking about, just even like the sort of nice little like niche historical thing of having to go to like certain counties or states, be able to get divorces and have to live there and establish residence for a certain amount of, these sort of like historical kind of things that women have to go through. Like that sort of piece dealing with, I think sometimes it feels like in order to be political, it has to be like whatever the sort of, I would argue a lot of those political type movies that we think of, those like biopics of like whatever, and, people doing some historical protest thing or a court case or this or that or whatever, where it feels very like someone explaining to you why it's political, or like reestablishing a historical event, as opposed to just telling. To me, it's political in the sense of like, what other movie can you think of where you sort of get a character like that? The first time I saw it, I remember being like, that is super fascinating. Just like the divorce stuff, right? And the residency and sort of there was like, oh, these places where it was like, they would host women who needed divorces because they had, that piece to me, I'm like, when else have you ever seen that on screen? Yeah. I've never seen anything else that depicted that. So that was like a sort of, again, insight into the sort of trying to like navigate bureaucracy for women, having to deal with like kind of establishing their own political agency and how they circumvented that little like sort of piece, obviously the queer love story and how the like, like family members and that kind of stuff handle it. I mean, I would argue it's sort of political, like the, like to have characters who like aren't, especially like, and to have queer characters who like are not ashamed at all of their queerness. Like Kay is just like, I am who I am. She's just very confident in who she is. And that sort of seeds like Vivian's response to her as like a character too, which is just kind of a beautiful thing. So I disagree. I think it's actually, it's not a splashy Hollywood like speech political film, but I actually think it's just political in the sense you don't see that stuff on screen rarely. So,
well, it's also like,
and so
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, it's arguably more powerful that way, right? Because then it can be, it feels a lot more baked in rather than like forced. The kind of thing you're talking about, I joked and coughed and said Aaron Sorkin, but like, I think you were on the episode, right? That we talked about Trial of Chicago 7, where it's like that movie is almost like rendered inert by the amount of explaining it does about one of like the, most interesting times in American history and volatile times in American history. And so we have here, I mean, it's like the personal is the political, right? So like by giving these characters such depth and, like you said, the bureaucracy of divorce in the 1950s, and then also there's the whole class thing going on between people living in this small town on the ranch and Evelyn from New York City as a college professor. It feels like there are so many political aspects to the story, but that isn't what is trying to be showcased. What's trying to be showcased are the people, because like that's how movies become powerful, as we get attached to these, relationships between and conflicts between people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like, but I mean, I guess when people say a film's political, there's often this idea that, even going back to Sorkin or anything like that, that there's some sort of deeper point. There's some sort of political stance or ideology that they're trying to get across, right? And I think with this film, there just isn't something there that's like that. You're all 100% correct. Every piece of art's political. Every sort of representation and just showing people being themselves and living out their lives. That's kind of a political thing. It can be. But on the other hand, to me, there's just not like a here's the point, which is probably good because those movies tend to fail and the point usually doesn't get across. It becomes saccharine or kind of pointless. But I think there doesn't seem like there's some sort of like, hey, you all should see or take away this from the film. I guess, do you guys think that there is something like that in there, or is it way more complicated than that?
I mean, I think this is a good time to talk about the ending of the movie. We did an episode on Brokeback Mountain a couple of seasons ago, and the big thing that kind of stands out like a sore thumb about that movie almost 20 years later is, how much that the queer love in that movie is couched in I'm sorry, I'm laughing because Jess just walked by. Is couched in this kind of like tragedy story. And I think our guest Amanda on that episode talked about, the bury your gaze trope of when it, that's how you're able to make a mainstream motion picture with queer characters. And that doesn't happen here with Desert Hearts, right? That ending is huge to it. It's not necessarily a 100% happy ending, like classical happy, but it's very much does not end with tragedy.
Yeah. And I think also, and maybe like the ending to me, and I think the first time I saw it, I was like, okay, I sort of think I know what's going to happen. I mean, what's your interpretation when Kay gets on the train? Is Kay saying, yeah, I'm going to come with you to New York, or are we going to stay in Nevada? I don't know, Molly, what do you think the ending sort of implies, or is it just open-ended to some degree?
Oh, it's one of my favorite endings of all time. I think that's just, the ending's just perfect to me. Like, that to me is, I don't know, like, just her saying, like, they're literally, I cannot think of another ending that I love more than that. I think sort of from just like a relational standpoint of just her being like, what do you want? And she's just like, I just want to spend 40 more minutes with you. Like, that's all, that's the ask. That's like, and isn't that the ask for like anything when you love somebody? Like, it's just like, I don't know. I just want to, that's it, right? You just keep asking that over and over again of somebody until you don't anymore. And it's just like I feel like the beauty, simplicity of that, of just, I never asked about like what happened after that, because that doesn't really matter in a sense, or that's, the ending is just
right.
Anyways.
It feels like the story is complete there. Like, that's, if you're looking for a thesis statement of it, I think that's a pretty good one, Molly. That like these characters, have so many reasons, made up, real, otherwise, that for not like committing to each other. And I mean, that's inherently political too, right? Because we're not just talking about queer love. We're talking about just like relationships in general, marriage or partnerships or whatever you want to call it. And at the end of it all, it's like and it happens multiple times before the ending of the film, they're just consistently coming back to each other. Like, I also really love the part where they get into the huge fight in the car and talk about who's going to drive and who's going to walk. And then it's just like cut to, like, everything's fine, because like that's how those things work. Like, it's not as if there's, true resolution, because that love is, trying to make things work, and then things hit a road bump, and then it's like, but we're going to keep choosing another 40 minutes.
Yeah. One of the things that stands out to me is like the way this movie looks is phenomenal, by the way. I mean, it just it's beautifully shot.
Robert Elswit.
Yeah, Elswit, who did Michael Clayton. One of
and There Will Be Blood, and
Syriana. Can I toss that out there?
Oh God, okay, that's a bridge too far, Dan.
It looks beautiful. I seen like on the Criterion Channel. I feel like it's coming across in like 1080p or something like that, and I feel like I'm missing out something without seeing it on Blu-ray or UHD, whatever it is these days, and like 4K.
Mm-hmm.
But it looks gorgeous. What's also like blows my mind about this movie, not only was like the funding just, you know, scraped together from like just the hard work of the director, like constantly pounding the pavement, going to meet people, networking, trying to raise like, you know, $15,000 at a time, literally is what she was doing. But the fact that like, because the budget was so tight, they only had 30 days of shooting essentially, or 31 days of shooting.
Yeah.
Which basically required them to shoot 2 scenes every day, no matter what. And if they couldn't get that scene in, it was tossed. And I kind of noticed that a little bit in the flow, where it's sort of like one scene from another. It's sort of like, oh, it feels like there's something that might be missing. So that doesn't, but it's not like that noticeable. I mean, how the means of production for this movie are like, we're tough. I mean, like tough across the board, but the end result is something fucking phenomenal. I mean, you gotta have to wonder like how all the elements came together here to make something, because a film is not just a person. It's not just the director, right? It's like 50, 60 people like at the top of their game, just hitting the right note at the right time constantly, from the moment that first like we're writing the script together essentially to the moment like the final edit's done. Like it has to be such a succession of successes essentially. It's always like mind-blowing to me when movies like this even exist, because it's just outrageous like how it all came together the way that it did through like an enormous amount of hard work. I mean, Molly, did anything stick out to you on your rewatch that felt anything different than when you first saw it back in the day?
No, I mean, I just like, I think you guys were saying or commenting that, you know, there's elements that sort of, whatever it is, like a, you know, a sort of romance story, but it's just, I don't know. Again, there's just something specific, which nobody has felt comfortable saying yet. It's like having 2 female leads. Like to me, tells a different kind of love story. There's a different texture to it that you can't get with like having it, the central characters be women, you know, and having the movie basically be, you know, almost solely from like multiple women's perspective is just like, there's like literally no other like romance movies like that. I mean, like maybe Portrait of a Lady on Fire is like maybe like another one that sort of more people have seen or whatever, but it's like such a rarity that there's just a feeling when you're watching it that's just so different than you do when there's just like men's stories intruding on the situation. So that just always feels, it just like has such a different feeling watching it. And like I said, there's just this sort of, I don't know, just like tenderness maybe is the word I'm looking for, gentleness, but not like in a cloying or not in like a, you know, infantilizing way. It's just literally like holding these people are just held so humanely and like tenderly and help hold each other that way, and like how it unfolds, that I just think is like, regardless of whatever, we just like don't get that kind of thing in most romance movies. So it's just always just such a like nice little cozy experience watching that movie.
Yeah, that's a good word for it, cozy. That fits like the cinematography you were mentioning, Dan, where it's like it, and I think that fits with like the vibe of it, kind of resembling those old Hollywood romances, just with a queer love story and 2 female leads. And yet there's like this, there's also like a lot of, it's tender, yeah, but there's still like a lot of passion on screen, like from the purples and different like neon hues of the nighttime scenes, and then obviously like the pretty incredible love scene that was probably just as revolutionary at the time as the film itself, where you have a very kind of I don't know. This has been like the main. I feel like it's always coming up on Twitter nowadays, right? Is the kind of almost stereotypical Gen Z point of view about why are there sex scenes in movies, right? Where it's I think you could easily point to this movie and show like how meaningful it can be, not just considering like the time period and the subject matter and the importance of that, but also just to see like how much it really kind of solidifies their relationship, like their chemistry between these actors is just as important in that scene. In fact, it's arguably, the kind of centerpiece of the film to see how that connection happens and everything that leads up to it and everything that comes after it too.
Yeah, it's is there a favorite scene that you guys have from this movie? I can tell you right now, my favorite scene is without a doubt the way that they look at each other at like the restaurant when their friend is singing and they're with their quote unquote dates and they're like looking at each other. And it's like that whole sequence up until when they drive out to the reservoir. I guess it's a lake. And then that's sort of the back and forth and the rain coming down and the whole thing. It's just, I'm a sucker for romance movies. Like I love them. And it's just one of those scenes where the building of the attraction and emotion is just so palpable. And of course it's like, is it a little bit tropey with the rain coming down? Yeah, who cares? It just works. It works incredibly well. And it's just, and I find myself on the rewatch of this, just like multiple scenes like that, especially the hotel room where it just, the way it's orchestrated and the way the two actors move throughout this scene and sort of their, acting's kind of like dancing with each other on screen to some degree. And the way that they do it is just phenomenal. And I don't know, there's something about the magnetism between the two that really just like flies through the screen even like 40 years later now. Molly, you said the ending is one of your favorite scenes. Do you have any other scenes that sort of pop up into your mind as so like they're kind of burned into your head?
Burned into my head. No, I mean, I think the sequence you're talking about, I mean, honestly, like any sequence where the two of them interact, because like when she first like stops by her house, like they just always have like to be able to like witness the progression and like, almost like they just play it so well of like, there's just something immediate and organic between them, that like, again, develops over time again, and in a way that you can't, it's just, there's just something so, I don't know what, I can't articulate the word, but, just something wonderful, humanizing that you can't do when you're telling a love story that involves a man. Sorry. It's just true. You can't do it. You know what I mean? There's just like an element there to like how, two women can fall in love and sort of how that can play out and what can be revealed about their characters. And just like shown in a way that I don't know. Anyways, so I think just like really any scene with the two of them is just always fun to watch because it's just so well done, their chemistry and like how it develops throughout the movie. So,
and like Donna Deitch, the director, these two leads also kind of unfortunately faded into obscurity after this movie. Helen Shaver probably had more of a quote unquote acting career afterwards, but it was like Tremors 2 Aftershocks. And
I think I remember in that. She was in The Craft.
Bit roles in some bigger movies too. And then, but Patricia Charbonneau, who pops off the screen just as much, like you mentioned earlier, Molly, like the way that she exudes confidence as Kay and she fully inhabits this character, and that chemistry is palpable. And yet she also was kind of given scraps afterwards. Did a little more TV,
a lot of TV.
Like Donna Deitch did. But yeah, mostly like straight to video and B movies. She had a bit part in She's All That as one of the moms. But it's just unfortunate. Like I'm curious because this movie was so ahead of its time. Was there a kind of effect? Because like Helen Shaver says in an interview how her agent, kind of tried to convince her to not take the role because she thought it would be the end of her career. Because it was so difficult to just cast in the first place, so difficult to fundraise and produce in the first place. Is it an unfortunate truth that as much attention as this movie's finally rightly getting with the help of Criterion and other, I'm sure other film organizations, and Donna Deitch is even back doing anniversary interviews and press screenings and stuff, and talking about trying to get it together enough money to make a sequel. However many years later, it was this an unfortunate side effect that like maybe it's too there's not enough evidence to say one way or another, but what do you guys think?
Well, I mean, Mai, why don't you go ahead? What do you think?
Oh, I mean, probably, yes. I think we all know, or we all should know how like Hollywood treats most women anyways. I think like Daniel Day-Lewis didn't get blacklisted in the 80s for like doing gay roles. I mean, I'm assuming it's a combination of that plus the fact, as you pointed out, this wasn't a studio movie. Like this wasn't like they did something that had them on a track, like to be more successful. Like, I think it was just, this wasn't, it may have contributed, but it was also like they just weren't. It's the unfortunate nature of the business too. It's like there's really talented people who do not ever get what they deserve or don't really get chances to showcase their talents. I mean, the directors like that as well. I mean, you know what I mean? There's just, it's like Hollywood is littered with super talented people that you're like, holy shit, these people should have been super successful, directing a million movies, starring in a bunch of stuff, like whatever, and they just don't get shit. So, I mean, I think it's like I'm sure it's both. But it's just harder for women, period. So, like, to kind of break out of that stuff, or like if there's something that's kind of designed. I mean, Wiper and I were just talking about Showgirls the other day. I mean, like that's another classic example where it's like I remember like even reading an interview with Paul Verhoeven where he actually said, I was like, well, thank you for like admitting it, at least, like where he was like, yeah, like Elizabeth Berkley got like the worst of all of that. He's like, I actually should have been the one, if anything, who should have gotten the worst of it, because it was my choice to like depict people that way and like making or whatever. And he was like, but she got the worst of it and that wasn't fair. Like there's just the mechanisms of how Hollywood works in general for stuff. It's like women tend to, in certain things, take the brunt of stuff or not get first, second, third chances on things. So I'm sure this didn't help either of them being in a movie like this, but I also don't think it wasn't like it was like in the newspapers everywhere and like whatever. I'm just sure it didn't help them, but also being a woman in Hollywood is what probably ultimately set all three of them back, unfortunately. So
yeah, I mean, think of it this way: like this movie won the Special Jury Prize at Sundance in '86. It's like if you had a man who did that, there's no doubt in my mind that like he gets not like free reign on his next movie, but he gets his next movie, right? Like he gets 10 million, whatever it would be back then, 5 million, 10 million. And Donna Deitch doesn't really direct another film until Criminal Passion in 1994, which I've never seen. I don't know much about it. But that's her last film. She did Angel on My Shoulder in 98, but that's a documentary. So this is essentially, one of
Well,
two
and it got made,
films.
like you said. Again, this
She sold
movie
her house
shouldn't
to make this movie.
exist. Yeah, like the movie shouldn't
Right.
exist. Like there isn't. I think it's where it's like, oh, somebody. I think that's like I was kind of saying like this wasn't like someone gave them a chance, like the Showgirls example, where it's like, oh, is this thing and it bombed. No one had expectations. No one gave them a chance with this. They made their own chance, and
Exactly.
and they did what they wanted to. So it's also like in the context of that about like what happened to these people, whatever. Too, like they made that whatever success it had was fully them doing that themselves. Like nobody gave them or backed them on anything. So that's also part of it as well. Like why didn't anything happen after that? Because just like before they made it, no one decided to give a shit,
Right.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, what a miracle movie. I want to like look at that because and yeah, there's lots of obvious reasons, both that are my fault and the nature of how movie nerds find movies to watch from throughout cinema history. But like I'm trying to think about it, like my entry point for like lesbian romance was probably before, it wasn't that much before Portrait of a Lady on Fire. It was probably Carol, and even that was it felt, it's just like insane that like this isn't just like 10 years ago. Desert Hearts is like from the middle of the 1980s.
Yeah, it's like 40 years old.
And why? So like, I'm wondering, like, is there what else is out there that I don't know exists? Like, I know that there's gotta be. This is hopefully going to be just like the first of like an uncovering for anybody that comes across it. What else should be we looking out for? Did this, like, I can't imagine what it'd be like seeing this movie 20 years ago, Molly. Did you, like, what else is out there that you know of that you would recommend for fans that enjoy of Desert Hearts that enjoy it?
what does the algorithm recommend?
The human algorithm.
I feel like my suggested things on HBO Max. Seriously. Well, I feel like we should get into Diner, and then maybe after Diner we can do some recommendations at the end.
Yeah, that
But
works.
I
We
feel
can do
like
that.
Molly's Rex.
there's some trash to talk about Diner first.
Yeah. Oh my god. I will also, before we get there, it's like every time we do a season or whatever, there's always like one or two movies that stick out that like I never would have found unless we did the podcast of the show. It's like, well, this is one of those movies where it's just unless you're exploring and you're open, you're never going to find it. That's what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, you got to be looking and you got to be sort of open to different perspectives and whatever. And we do that for fun as like a hobby on the show. And like, yeah, at least once a season, like a movie like Sorcerer. I'd never heard of that movie. No idea what the hell it was. I don't even really love that movie, but it's like such like an interesting film that like you just, you have to like put in the time and like effort and research and be a nerd about it, but like not be a nerd bro about it, if that makes sense.
Oh, and I do want to put a plug in because speaking like you said about like the one movie of each cycle of episodes that comes up, and for me, when we did the Risque Romance episode, you were absent, but I looked at with Lillian, our guest, the Wachowskis' Bound from '96, which I had never seen, and I was just like completely blown away, especially because I'm kind of ambivalent about their other movies as directors, and I think there's something going on there too, where it's like, to go back to what Molly said about kind of the tenderness aspect of what's happening, both in front of and behind the camera. And it's like this whole, it's insane how it's like this whole other world that exists in cinema, and just the unfortunate nature of being kind of like a nerd bro for so long and still admittedly to some degree keeps us from some of these things. Okay, time to shit on Diner.
Speaking of tender, how about those diner scenes in Diner? I had so Yikes is right. I was so when I told you guys I saw this for the first time like 5 years, and I was like, okay. And then on the rewatch, me and Mal actually watched together. I was just like, what? Like I just couldn't.
I mean, I'm sure watching with me didn't help, but yeah,
it didn't help. I mean, I had my own criterion, a commentary track with Molly watching this last time, but. The thing that stands out to me about Diner, and the reason that I chose it, is that it is considered, a really, really good film. It has been since it got released. It has this sort of cachet to it. When I thought about movies set in the 50s, I was like, well, Diner's got to be one of them without a doubt. Going back and doing a rewatch, and even on the original watch, I'm just not picking up. I'm not picking up even what would stick out to people back in the 1980s. Why this would be such a like groundbreaking film or interesting film. It seems kind of plotting to me. The characterizations seem a little bit rote. I don't feel like they're all really likable people. I don't know. Help me out. Chris, is there anything here that sticks out to you that like you can grab onto as you're like, okay, there's something here?
Well, I mentioned this a little while ago, but this is one of those movies that I have an unfortunate distinct memory of leaving on every time it was on DBS when I was a kid.
Okay, gotcha. One of those films. Yeah. That's like me and Sicario for the last 5 years.
But like, number one, the edited version for television, and especially through the eyes of like an 11, 12-year-old or whatever. I hadn't seen it since then. So I was like, I was really thinking that I was going to throw on an old cozy classic, to use Molly's word. Yeah. And I just like, from the opening minutes, I don't know, maybe not the opening minutes, but like pretty quickly, it just is, it's like a different kind of uncovering where I'm just like, oh, wow. Yeah, this didn't age well. This
didn't age all that well. Molly, you'd obviously seen it before, right? Or no?
Yeah, I'd seen it before. I mean, like forever ago, though.
A long time ago.
I barely remembered it.
How did it feel different on the rewatch?
Because I didn't have like a strong sense memory of the first time, but like it was embarrassing. Yeah. Like, I mean, again, especially like if, we're sort of juxtaposing like Desert Hearts to like this, it's like, again, for all the stuff we talked about, it's a superior film in literally every way. Yeah. And also like the sort of, just honestly, patheticness? I don't know. It's really pathetic. Like, it's like comparatively, I would like just the writing, the characterization, the like, again, thinking of like that frustrating reality of like, said somebody sort of, this is a group of people who like busted their ass to like make something really beautiful and heartfelt that like, you want to keep rewatching and really like, is this beautiful piece of art? And then it's like people make Diner and then they just like all get to keep making stuff forever. Like every single fucking one of them, and every single person involved in that movie becomes at least a millionaire at some point, and it's like really leaves a badass taste in your mouth, and you have to think about that too, where you're just like, oh, everybody got to make so many more things. You got to create, you know what I mean? I think I ultimately imagine if you're like somebody who's an artist in any way, like actor, directors, and all that, and not some of the people, obviously, like the cinematographer and stuff, but like just the director, the actors in like Desert Hearts. It's just like, I don't know, they didn't like get to like keep creating shit, or like have any autonomy or like funding or sort of, kind of support to create things again. Yeah. And, everybody in this fucking movie created like all the actors and like all the director, right? Everybody just got to just always have, to varying degrees that they, oh my God, like fucking Mickey Rourke gets like 80,000 chances, right? I mean, Barry Levinson gets 8,000 chances to make varying degrees of quality films. You know what I mean? Like everybody gets like so many chances. That's annoying.
I was walking through Barry's filmography, and I was like, "Oof!" I had always thought Barry had much more stature in my head. That's probably obviously a bias, right? But like going through his, like The Natural. Okay, cool. Good Morning Vietnam, sure. I mean, you can go through the whole list. I mean, Rain Man probably sticks out as probably the best movie that he's done, but he has a lot of terrible movies. Wag the Dog, Sphere, Liberty Heights, which is part of a trilogy, technically a Baltimore trilogy that this movie starts out. He got 1,000 chances, and he ends his career with what? Rock the Casbah, technically Open Road Films. Oh, he has a new one coming out next year, Wise Guys.
Yeah,
Rock the Casbah was
Wise Guys.
I think, like in terms of epic failures, it's near the top of the list. I had a box office podcast thing going on at the time, and it was like Rock the Casbah was like unbelievable failure, and that's like his 30th chance. And it's just, it's like mind blowing how the industry. I mean, the thing that also sticks out to me with this film is that it's a major studio. It's MGM, right? They produce the movie. Mm-hmm. They also put it out. MGM does test screenings on this movie in St. Louis or in a couple other cities. Does incredibly poorly. The people hate the movie. Diner's a terrible movie, right? So MGM's sort of like, well, we're not going to put this out. Someone at MGM, I forget how it like kind of works, but like screened it for like, who's the famous New York Times film critic that I'm thinking of?
Vincent Canby?
No. What's her name? They screened it for her.
Pauline Kael?
Yes. They screened it for her because she knew somebody associated with the movie. They steal a print, screen it for her. She calls MGM and says, if you don't release this, I'm still going to write a rave review. So when we talk about like second chances, who do you know, nepotism, it all sort of adds up to being like, but what I think what's crazy about it, and obviously eye-opening, is that those influences and that machinery can change culture dramatically, right? And it makes a movie like Diner, which, okay, if you saw it back then, it's like kind of interestingly acted. There's a lot of interesting stars in it. It's not super well written. It doesn't really have an interesting sort of story to tell. It's more vignettes than anything. But it ends up becoming this cultural touchstone. And you're like, well, how did that happen? It happened because, the people that made it were in a position of power. And even when the film wasn't good, didn't test good, they had enough, connections and nepotism to sort of make it get released anyways. So it's like, it's one of those things where it's just like, oh my God, like how did we get here? Well, this is how we got there. They had a lot of power and money. Is what it comes down to, unfortunately.
But this is Barry Levinson's first movie.
Yeah, his debut movie.
So I'm like, and he's a Baltimore kid, went to community college, but he is one of those guys that moved to Los Angeles and kind of scrapped around writing for TV shows and variety shows. But I mean, it isn't so much of like, it doesn't seem like it's so much of a nepotism thing. It's just like a white guy thing, right? Like
not failing upwards, but like, like when he swings, the ball's like 10 times bigger than it is for somebody else. You know what I mean? Like, so he worked hard and he went for it. And it's just,
and he wrote movies for Mel Brooks.
Yeah, Mel Brooks before he
directed.
Yeah, Mel Brooks directly told him, "Hey, work on this idea." So like even right there, you have Mel Brooks in your corner in your debut film. Yes. It's a little bit different than selling your own house to fund a movie. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly.
It's like a different ball game.
Yeah. And so, and cut to 2023, and his son is making The Idol.
But have you guys seen that yet?
No, I've not watched that.
Like 3 episodes.
That's
this is what it
unfortunate
gets you.
choice.
This is what Hollywood runs on. Seriously.
Yeah.
This is a question for you, gentlemen. The question that I really want to ask every time I watch a movie that's like wall to wall dudes, right?
Sure.
Where it's like, is this how men see themselves?
Oh God, no. I hope not.
It depends. Like, I've certainly known men in my life and have been in social groups where, I would see that like some of the way that men represent, how Diner represents men, maybe not that far off. But in general, I would say like that's not the majority of men.
I guess it's just fascinating to me how men continually write themselves across like most of cinema, right? because men
how
are
would-
doing most of the writing.
As disgusting pigs. Yeah.
well, but
Or just
then-
lovable,
like
disgusting
it's
things.
uninteresting. Like none of the people in this movie, on top of just the like really like very whatever gender role shit, like everyone's just boring. Like nobody to me is a very like no one has dimension or depth. All these people are just like
there's no
really,
emotional depth. Yeah.
there's no like, do you know what I'm saying? Like I was again, because of the juxtaposition with Desert Hearts is the example today of like, again, a movie where everyone's, both of you are saying like, oh yeah, not much happens. It's sort of this quiet little whatever kind of thing. But like, so again, a great sort of compliment to the scale or sort of stakes of Diner, but it's like the characters and the way that the women are, the interiority and like the way that the like women are writing themselves as like actual humans with dimension and like I just, again, where I'm just like, like men have so many chances to tell men's stories, if you will. And like, I just am completely almost universally uncompelled by the stories they choose to tell about themselves. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that we've only made cursory mention of like the whole theme of this cycle of episodes, it being the 1950s. Right. Sure. And it's apparent, right, that Levinson and I mean, I guess not most of his actors here are younger, but this is like this ongoing thing, I think, for like mid-century America, and all the way into like the 90s. Like there was a 2012 Vanity Fair article I found, an anniversary piece on Diner, talking about how it paved the way for the likes of Jerry Seinfeld and Judd Apatow. And it's like, yeah, like we've this really like just kind of like I guess it's become a little more self-aware. Like Jerry Seinfeld's character on Seinfeld is meant to be unlikable. And like Judd Apatow writes his male characters to like have a heart of gold, but like on the surface be like these really like incorrigible man children. And here with Diner, it's just like, it's so unself-aware. Like even totally like the things that are supposed like choices, directorial or otherwise, like the fact that we never see Steve Guttenberg's fiance/wife's face throughout the film, like as I don't know, there's just like so many weird things. Like is this movie, I also meant to, is this movie the origin of like the dick in the popcorn box thing?
I think it is. I think so.
Why did Whitebird ask that question when we were watching it? And I'm like, maybe, but it strikes me as, I don't think like maybe it was like the original representation of it as a cinema screen, but there's no like, there was dudes that had that idea. Like if they put that idea in a movie, it was because it was like a joke when they were kids or something, right?
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Because I don't remember that from the TBS version.
I just remember screaming the entire film. I was like, to all the women when they were having, I'm just like, stand up. What are you doing? Stand like,
I know.
It's just so, there's not even like an ounce of like backbone that anyone, like any of like the two women characters have in this movie. They're just like, you're right. You didn't mean to put your dick in the popcorn bucket. I'm like, oh my God. Like, well,
he was just trying to get comfortable.
Stay mad. Like that was like the indignity of having her like, I was like, yes, that response is appropriate. And then having his like really, really terrible lackluster like, and that happened again too with Ellen Barkin and like, and she's being, thanks for respecting me enough to not fuck me in front of your friends. I was like, stand up. I need you to stand up. Like, what are you doing?
One of which is my husband. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. It was bad. But I guess, anyways, the recommendation for you guys, if you want to offer any recommendations for me, not with the 50s time period, any movie that you feel really captures, really is like, this is men choosing to tell a compelling story about men. I would love your recommendations.
Drinking Buddies.
I have a side offline story about that. But anyways, come back to me on that one, and I'll ruin Drinking Buddies for you.
Oh, no, don't ruin it, please.
Okay, but don't ask me later. But anyways, but besides Drinking Buddies, you think on that.
Yeah, that's a good thinker, Molly.
Which is sad. That's a good thinker. So
I know it really is. It really, really is. I think. Okay, so to kind of put a pin on this before we get to your recommendations, Molly, and then I've got some trivia for us as well. The question that kind of just like lingered while I like had a stomachache during the credits of Diner. Was essentially like both of these movies not only took place in the 50s, they took place specifically in 1959. And Diner specifically, like on the New Year's Eve, is where it ends of, leading into the 60s.
Yeah.
What are we to make of this? Like, I think there's something not only going on with like obviously who's telling the story, and whose perspectives we are actually like leaning into and giving air to in the scripts, but like how was it, like was this significant, like either being self-aware or otherwise, that this was a really kind of turning point in at least American like gender roles and feminism? Because like to see it just boggles my mind. Like I couldn't help but like go into and like learn about like why Reno, Nevada was like a hotbed for women that wanted to get divorces quickly in the late 50s, and as well as like how like the like male chauvinism was so heavily rooted in specifically like this kind of encroachment of, I don't know, of change, of progress. Mm-hmm. Post World War II, we talked this a little bit, Dan, right? When we talked Far From Heaven and The Majestic. Is there a significance to that, either on purpose or otherwise, that like this is like, I guess I've never really thought about it because I obviously wasn't alive back then. And I feel like that's almost like an empty chunk of American history, like the 50s into the 60s for me. Well, what's there to figure out?
I mean, I can speak to the Diner part of it pretty easily. Like this is like it's a movie that purports or basically is stating an ideology. And that ideology is that there were times in this country that were good and were great and they were amazing and we should remember them. And it creates this sort of nostalgia disease about the past. And like, that's why Diner, I think, connected with a lot of people when it came out, because it came out, boomers in the 80s. It's like, oh yeah, I remember being, 23 back then and doing this stupid stuff and like, oh yeah, it's silly, but it creates this weird sort of feedback loop in people's memories or something that tells them that no, the past was better, or these certain aspects of the past were a better world. And it almost becomes like, I'm going to sound like an idiot, but I'm going to say it almost becomes like a utopianism or fundamentalism, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's like these values that we quote unquote remember that were there are somehow missing now, and we need to bring them back. And you start bringing them back by remembering them and codifying them. And that's like what a movie like Diner does. It says, hey, the 50s were like an interesting, fascinating time. We should remember them fondly because we did all these like crazy things, like put a dick in a bag and nothing about it. Like when you really think of it on the face of it, it's so fucked up. Because
it's always the nostalgia for white men.
Correct. Yes. Well, because white men made it, right? And it's like they're not going to tell a great story about like somebody else. They're going to tell a great story about themselves.
Right, because you can't really. I mean, you can try, but it's just doesn't. You can't get away with the fantasy of like making a nostalgic movie about women in the 50s, or like in some sort of like utopian kind of way, or like anybody who's not white. Like, I mean, people can, but like that's not going to ring true. I think there's an element that can sort of like you can suspend disbelief and be like, yeah, that's probably what it was like. Because yeah, maybe it did feel like that for some dudes in the 50s. I don't know, like,
Yeah.
but they were the only one that had the privilege to sort of like indulge in that kind of nostalgia that it like may possibly, right? Like imagine that it could have been true. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, Desert Hearts is a completely different story, right? I don't know. There's something about it that just viewing it through the lens of the 50s, it rewrites history in a sense. Right.
Well, because that's what I was saying in the beginning. It's like political in the sense of like you literally nobody's story like that gets to be told.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? But there was absolutely people like women and, any number of other things. But like we're just telling like a just run of the mill human story can be political in the sense of like it's revolutionary because like literally nobody else, there's no other way to access that kind of story,
Yeah.
Because we just don't show them. We don't tell them. People aren't allowed to write them. But like there's people. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like been redacted, that viewpoint. Any suggestions for the audience, Molly, of next steps if they check out Desert Hearts? Anything that comes to mind?
I mean, I don't like, yeah, I don't think there's anything like where it's like, I don't know, like quite like Desert Hearts. But I think if you're looking for like films that don't center men, if we want, and maybe you're like, lesbian love stories are just films that don't center relationships with men. There's Girlfriends, which is not to be confused with the UPN series. Girlfriends, which is the
I was going to say.
No, it's a indie film. Look it up. Claudia Weil. And let's see. The 90s, The Incredible True Story of Two Girls in Love is like a high school lesbian romance from like 93, 94 maybe or something.
Nice,
but I'm a Cheerleader is also another classic. Yes. I'm thinking of like, I'm trying to think of stuff that like feels a little like fun when you watch it too. If unlike Desert Hearts, where it's not sort of, there's other things, but like where it's a little more like in the drama, intense. And I would argue, it's not a lesbian love story, but doesn't center Romeo and Michelle's high school union. I will go to bat for that every time because that is a beautiful little movie that's just all about loving your life and that literally men are fucking idiots and you don't need them.
All right, so some trivia. Let's close it out with some trivia. Thank you.
All right. I got 5 questions for you, Molly. Here's how it goes for this season. I'm going to read from a screenplay of a film that was released in the 1980s but took place in the 1950s. Not one of the ones we just discussed. They're all pretty, I think, big, well-known films, but I'm only going to read the narration in just a few sentences to see if you can guess what movie it is.
All right,
takes place in the 1950s, came out in the 1980s. We're going to start with an easy one. Exterior, Welton Academy, main lawn, day. Welton Academy is a cluster of traditional weathered stone buildings. The time is 1959, but at Welton, this is irrelevant. This school, with its traditions, is completely isolated from the politics or trends of the outside world.
Am I supposed to answer? Or
yeah, you can guess. Go for it. No, we both.
Yeah, guest gets to guess first.
Oh, Dead Poets Society.
Yeah, that's what
All right. Good. Next up, interior, Joey's Pelham Parkway house, living room night, February 14, 1951. Lenore, Joey's wife, watches the 6th Robinson LaMotta fight on Joey's new television console. Joey walks by on his way to another room but stops to watch. Lenore is not a fight fan but is caught up in the fight anyway.
I don't know.
Am I supposed to guess?
Yeah, go for it.
Go for it.
Raging Bull?
Yeah, Molly's much better at this than you, Dan.
You see, Molly's much better at this.
Way better.
Yeah. Okay, good. Let's see if you can do the hat trick, Molly.
What's the hat trick?
Insert
What?
news.
3 in a row, or 3 goals.
3 in a row.
Oh, okay.
It's a sports metaphor, Molly. It's a guy thing. Insert newspaper. The date is March 18, 1955. On the back of the newspaper is an automobile advertisement with a picture of a, quote, new 1955 Studebaker. The copy clearly says, "You'll be noticed driving the car of the future, the all-new 1955 Studebaker."
Uh,
I have no idea.
Uh,
80s.
I don't know. Back to the Future.
Yeah, that's right.
Dude.
Wow. That's impressive. Okay, next one. This is number 4.
What happens if what's it called if you get 4?
I don't know if that's a thing.
Yeah, I don't
We'll
know.
call it the
Why is it a
Molly.
hat? Why is there something for 3
Yeah.
but not 4 or 5? What the fuck's a hat trick?
It's a sticky wicket.
Yeah,
I think.
I don't want it then.
Interior Plymouth Fury assembly line, superimposed, Detroit, 1957. The plant is state of the art for 57. Manual labor is prevalent, no computers, little automation, just plain hard work and the seething anger that goes with it. You can see it in the eyes of the assembly line workers. Some of them are black, most are white, all of them sweat. Grimy hands work fast to marry engine blocked chassis.
Whew. No idea.
Molly?
I can't. I feel like I want to ask. Can I ask? Can I ask for other pieces of information? That's like the year from the year the movie came out.
Oh yeah, that's good.
1983.
Ooh.
Okay.
I have no idea. Any other clues?
Based on a Stephen King novel.
Oh, Christine.
Yeah.
Yeah, good work. All right, last one. I don't know about this one. I've never seen this movie, but I was kind of scraping, but I think you'll get it. I think, I don't know. Interior, young Pink's mother's house, day 1950. Young Pink, now aged 10, comes home from school. His mother is still out at work. He makes himself a piece of bread and jam. He wanders up the stairs and hovers outside her bedroom. The door is open. He looks inside. He decides to venture in. Nervously, he peeks inside drawers of underwear, examining a voluminous pink bra. He slowly opens a bottom drawer and discovers his father's uniform wrapped in tissue. He puts on the jacket, the tat, and the Sam Brown with revolver holster. He toys with the gun and live ammunition that he has discovered.
It sounds familiar, but I can't place it. Ma, do you know?
I don't know. This one might be the one that stumps me. I don't know.
Let's get a clue.
Year of release, 1982.
Can I get a sentence? I just I feel like I'm like a spelling bee.
1982. Yeah, can I get an original origin? So it came out in 1982.
Yeah, like a word origin.
What else you got?
Screenplay was written by a musician.
Anything else?
Great Balls of Fire?
It was directed by Alan Parker, the same director as Fame and Evita.
Okay, let me think on this
Brutal.
now.
42.
What the fuck's it called? The Pink Floyd movie, right?
Yeah, The Wall.
Wall.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's right.
Oh my gosh, that was a rough one. Sorry, guys, but good work, Molly, on the first 3, and then the 4th with the assist. Dan, you were 0 for 5 that round.
That's what it is.
Coming up on Film Trace, we have an episode featuring Andrea Gomez from Collider. Very excited to have her on the show. Awesome writer and critic, talking about The Last Picture Show and Lenny from the 70s, both set in the 1950s.
Nice.
Thank you, Molly, so much for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be back. And remember, everyone who's listening, if you want to support the podcast and support my friends, make sure you complain about me being on the show, because that's how they know they made it.
Oh yeah, I have a slight correction to make. You were on the show more recently than Body Heat. We talked The Game and Insomnia.
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay. But it's still been a while. That was a
in
while
May
ago.
of last year. That was May of last year.
Yeah, so it was a year ago. Okay, so it's been a while.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, in the comments, comment below that I'm annoying and I have an annoying voice or something. But just, comment below. And that's how they know they made it. Got to complain about the women on the podcast.
All right, thanks again, Molly. This has been Film Trace.